He didn't look like mucho weathered face beneath a faded ball cap, a slow, measured gait, the slight tremble of a limp that marked decades of silent sacrifice. David Carter walked into the gun store the way he had walked into every room since the war, quietly, unassuming. Just a man with a memory too heavy to share. He didn't want a parade. He didn't want thanks. All he wanted was to see an old friend, a replica M1 Garand, the rifle he'd carried across jungles and deserts, the one that had become more than just steel and wood to him. But the clerk behind the counter didn't see a veteran. He saw an old man with a story no one asked to hear. He laughed, mocking Carter's limp, and told him to leave. Carter didn't argue. He simply turned, eyes steady, and left one step at a time, never guessing who was about to walk through that same door. Stay with us until the end of this video to witness what loyalty, honor, and brotherhood truly mean, and how one small town learned the lesson of a lifetime. Don't forget to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Let's see how far this story reaches. Outside, the afternoon sun pressed down on the cracked pavement, baking the asphalt in a haze of heat. David Carter's steps were slow but steady, his boots leaving faint imprints in the dust as he made his way toward the faded pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot. He didn't look back, didn't expect anything to change. He'd been dismissed enough times in his life to know when to walk away. But inside the gun shop, not everyone had been blind to what happened. By the ammo rack, a woman in her late 40s, brown hair pulled into a practical ponytail, sleeves rolled to her elbows, had seen everything. Her name was Sarah Martinez, a nurse by trade, the kind of woman who noticed details others missed. She watched as Carter left, the slow determination in his stride, the weight of something unspoken on his shoulders. She had seen that look before in hospital corridors, on soldiers too proud to ask for help. Sarah clenched her jaw, eyes narrowing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her fingers dialing a number she hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a voice answered, calm, steady, the kind that gave orders and expected them to be followed. "Martinez," the voice said. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "David Carter," she said, keeping her voice low. He was just humiliated by a couple of kids at the gun shop on Main. They mocked him, called him old, told him to leave. Silence stretched on the line, heavy, deliberate. Then the voice came back, measured but resolute. "Understood," he said. "Was he hurt?" Sarah shook her head, though no one could see. "No," she replied. "Not physically." Another pause. She could almost hear the gears turning on the other end. "We'll handle it," he said. "Where are you now?" She glanced around the shop, the fluorescent lights too bright, the smell of oil and cold metal pressing in. "Inside," she said. "They're laughing again, like he was nothing." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the screen, then lowered the phone, her heartbeat steady now. She'd done what she could. She'd spoken for a man who wouldn't speak for himself. Outside, David Carter's pickup started with a low rumble and eased out onto the road, disappearing into the shimmer of heat and the quiet hush of a town that had long forgotten men like him. But one thing Sarah Martinez knew: men like Carter never really walked alone. Not when there were others who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with him through the worst the world had to offer. And she knew, with a certainty that made her skin prickle, that somewhere, right now, a call was being made, a plan was being set in motion, quiet promise that no man would be left to stand alone. At exactly 11:40, 2 a.m., the first matte, black SUV rolled into the lot in front of the gun shop. Its windows were tinted dark, the hum of its engine a low, even growl that seemed to vibrate beneath the pavement. Another SUV pulled in behind it, followed by a third. No lights, no sirens. Just three quiet machines carrying something stronger than noisier presence that made the world slow down and take notice. Inside, the air-conditioned hum of the gun shop carried on as if nothing had changed. Jack leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, one foot tapping lazily to the rhythm of an old country song playing overhead. Tyler, wiping down the glass display, glanced at the door but didn't bother to straighten his posture. To them, the last customer was just an old man who had come and gone, leaving nothing behind but the echo of laughter. The chime above the door gave a soft, almost delicate ring like the hush before a storm. The first man stepped inside. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain t-shirt that did little to hide the taut lines of muscle beneath. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room with the precision of a man who had walked into rooms like this 100 times, in 100 different countries. Behind him, another man entered, this one older, hair cut short and flecked with grey at the temples, his jaw set like carved stone. A row of ribbons lined the breast of his jacket, each one a testament to battles fought and sacrifices made. One by one, they came 12 men in all silent, deliberate, their movements fluid and practiced. They fanned out, forming a loose semicircle that pressed the air flat and left no space for doubt. Jack looked up, the words caught in his throat as his eyes darted from one man to the next. He had never seen a formation like this, quiet, unwavering, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Tyler's cloth fell from his hands as he backed into the counter, his face pale. The older man, Michael, the team leader, stepped forward. His gaze cut through the distance, landing on Jack with a weight that made him flinch. Michael placed something on the glacis-scorched flag patch, its edges frayed and darkened, the colors nearly lost to time and fire. 1 hour ago, Michael began, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. A man walked through that door. He didn't come here for thanks or recognition. He just wanted to see an old friend, the M1 Garand he carried across the jungles and deserts for this country. Jack opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came. "You didn't ask who he was," Michael continued, his eyes steady. "You didn't ask what he'd done. You laughed. You mocked his limp. You told him to leave." He placed a second item on the counter, a faded photograph, edges curled from years in a pocket. 8 men, their faces dirt-smeared and sunburnt, arms slung over each other's shoulders. In the center, David Carter, younger then, eyes bright, the same M1 Garand slung across his chest. Michael's voice softened. "That man carried me out of a firefight with a bullet in his gut. He never asked for a medal. He never asked for thanks. But when he walked in here today, you treated him like he didn't matter." He let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing down on every corner of the shop. Then he took a step back, letting the others close ranks behind him. "No threats. No apologies demanded. We're not here for that," he said. "We're just here to make sure you understand one thing. Men like him, men like us, don't walk alone." And with that, Michael turned, the rest of the team following without a single word, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself might crack. The silence left by the SEALs was a different kind of quiet, dense, charged with a tension that refused to lift even after the door swung shut behind them. Jack stood frozen, the weight of the photograph still sitting on the counter, its faded edges curling slightly under the glare of the shop's fluorescent lights. Tyler reached out as if to pick it up but thought better of it, his fingers trembling. Outside, the SUVs pulled away one by one, engines low and steady, no rush in their departure. They left no smoke, no sound of screeching tires, just the steady hum of engines carrying 12 men back to wherever they'd come from. But the world they left behind wasn't the same. A customer who'd stepped in just moments after the SEALs' exit, a young man in a college sweatshirt, phone already in hand, snapped a photo of the counter. 8 men in a single frame. The photo, the patch, the clerks' pale faces. He posted it to his veteran group online with a simple caption, "When you disrespect a SEAL, you disrespect them all." Within minutes, the image began to spread. First among small veteran communities, people who recognized the weight behind the silent stand. Then local social media groups picked it up, each share adding a new layer of commentary. Who was the old man? What did he do to deserve that kind of loyalty? Was this real? By the time the clock struck 2 p.m., the story had leapt from screen to screen, carried by the kind of quiet reverence that only true sacrifice could demand. One comment in particular struck a chord. "David Carter. He served with my uncle in Iraq. They called him the Ghost because he'd get the team out no matter what. At the gun shop, customers trickled in, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. Some just stood by the counter, staring at the photo, the patch, and the clerk behind the register, now pale and silent, a man transformed by the weight of what he hadn't known. One older man in a worn leather jacket, Vietnam vet, his sleeve rolled up to reveal a faded tattoo, stood the longest. He stared at the picture without blinking, his lips pressed tight. Then, slowly, he raised a hand in a quiet salute before turning and walking out, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. No one asked for refunds. No one demanded apologies. They didn't need to. The town had learned something that day. Something about respect, about loyalty, about the quiet bonds that tie men together long after the battles are over. And somewhere out on the edge of town, David Carter kept walking, boots steady, eyes forward, unaware of the storm he'd left in his wake. The sun was starting its slow descent, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and weathered storefronts of Main Street. The gun shop, once just another stop for hunters and hobbyists, had become something different overnight. Word had spread like a silent wildfire, igniting curiosity and, more than that, a sense of quiet reckoning among the town's residents. Inside, the scorched patch and the faded photograph still sat on the counter. Jack and Tyler hadn't moved them. Neither had spoken much since the SEALs had left, their laughter replaced by a silence too thick to break. The usual steady stream of customers had shifted too. People came in not with lists and shopping bags, but with questions that hung heavy in the air, waiting for someone to answer. A mother and her teenage son stood near the display, the boy's eyes locked on the photograph. "Who was he?" he asked, his voice hushed. His mother glanced at the clerk, then back at the photo. "A man who carried more than just a rifle," she said quietly. "A man who carried the weight of his brothers and never asked for a thank you." The boy nodded slowly, his eyes solemn, as if he understood more than words could say. Across town, at the diner where David Carter sometimes sat for his morning coffee, an older man in a Desert Storm jacket nursed a cup of black coffee, his eyes on the window. He'd heard the story everyone had by now. He remembered Carter, though they'd never spoken much. A man who came and went without fuss, who always held the door open for others. He set his cup down and motioned the waitress over. "Next time he's in," he said, voice low. Tell him he's got a brother here." The waitress smiled, eyes soft, and nodded. Meanwhile, in the local high school, a history teacher pinned a printout of the photo on the bulletin board. "Let this be a lesson," she told her class. "Respect is earned on battlefields, and carried home on shoulders sometimes by men you'll never know." Sarah Martinez, the nurse who had made the call, found herself at the grocery store checkout line, a stranger tapping her shoulder. "Were you the one who called them?" the woman asked, eyes bright with curiosity and something like gratitude. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Someone had to," she said simply. "Thank you," the woman whispered, voice thick with emotion. At the gun shop, a small group of veterans, some with ball caps, others with old unit patches on their jackets, gathered by the counter, each leaving behind a challenge coin or a small patch from their service. One by one, they added to the growing tribute, a silent testament to the fact that respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be given, one small gesture at a time. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the memory of a man who hadn't asked for honor, but whose presence had reminded an entire town what it meant to stand together. David Carter's morning routine hadn't changed, even after the silence he'd left behind in that gun shop. Before the sun broke the horizon, he rose from his small bed, laced his boots with the same methodical care he'd used in a dozen countries, and walked the same path he'd walked for years. 2 miles, rain or shine. Always the same diner at the end of the smoky windows, the smell of black coffee, and a waitress named Linda who didn't ask questions. He slipped into his usual booth near the back, the one that gave him a view of the door and enough space to stretch his leg. The chipped formica table gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lights. Carter folded his hands in front of him, his mind already drifting to the past, the taste of dust and grit, the steady thrum of helicopter blades overhead, the brotherhood that had carried him through more than a few dark nights. Linda approached, a tired smile on her face. "The usual, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice a gentle familiarity. He nodded, eyes soft. "Yeah, just black. No sugar." As she walked away, the bell over the door jingled. Carter's eyes lifted, sharp and instinctive, though he didn't tense. He'd learned long ago that danger didn't always announce itself. But what he saw made his breath catch for just a moment. 12 men stepped in, one by one. No uniforms, but everything about them said the same thing. Quiet strength, watchful eyes. The kind of men who moved through the world carrying invisible scars and unspoken bonds. Michael, the team leader, led the way, his face calm but serious. He paused, scanning the diner until his gaze found Carter. For a moment, no one moved. The diner seemed to hold its breath, the low murmur of conversation fading as people noticed the presence that had just arrived. Michael nodded once, a silent question in his eyes. Carter met his gaze, the years between them folding away like a paper map. He gave a small nod, barely more than a tilt of his chin. Michael's lips curved into a half smile. He turned to his men, his voice low but strong. "If it's all right with you, sir," he said, eyes back on Carter, "we'd like to join you." Carter let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Always room for one more," he said, his voice rough with the weight of memories. The SEALs moved to the booth, some sliding in beside him, others pulling up chairs, their presence filling the space with a quiet reverence. No one needed to speak. Words would have been too small for the history that stretched between them. In the hush of that diner, they sat together, 12 brothers, and one quiet man who'd carried them all, in one way or another, through the darkness. And in that silence, something unspoken but undeniable passed between Thema promised that even in a world that sometimes forgot, they never would. The days that followed the SEALs' quiet visit to the diner felt different somehow, though no one could put a finger on exactly why. Main Street still buzzed with the usual routinous trucks rumbling past, shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks, the occasional bark of a dog chasing shadows, but there was an undercurrent that hadn't been there before. A kind of hush that came from respect rather than fear. At the gun shop, the manager, Mr. Hollis, returned from a buying trip and found the display case rearranged. Jack and Tyler were nowhere in sight, but on the counter lay the scorched flag patch, the faded photo, and beside them, the M1 Garand David Carter had asked about. Hollis stared at the rifle a long time, running a calloused hand over the worn stock. With a sigh, he reached for a piece of notepaper and scrawled a message in neat block letters. He carried it once. We'll carry the memory now. He slipped the note into a small frame and propped it next to the display. It wasn't flashy, no marketing, no hashtags, just a quiet promise that the store would remember the man they hadn't recognized that day. Word of the SEALs' silent stand continued to spread, carried from porch conversations to coffee shop counters, from text messages to local news segments. Even people who'd never paid much attention to the war or the men who'd fought it found themselves pausing a moment longer when they saw an old man in a cap or a limp that spoke of stories untold. At the high school, the history teacher who'd pinned the photo to the bulletin board now found students gathering there between classes, some asking questions about what it meant to serve, others just staring at the image, the weight of the men's silence pressing on them in ways that history books never could. One afternoon, a teenage boy named Ethan Broad, shouldered but soft-eyed, walked into the diner and spotted Carter at his usual table. He hesitated, then approached, his voice low but steady. "Sir," he said, "my dad served too. He never talked about it. I guess I never thought about what it meant." He shifted uncomfortably. "But I saw the picture. I just wanted to say thank you for whatever you did." Carter looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He nodded once, his voice calm. "You're welcome, son," he said. "Just remember, some of us never needed thanks, just respect." Ethan ducked his head, cheeks flushed, and hurried out, but not before leaving something behind: a challenge coin, small and battered, placed gently on the table's edge. Carter picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, and let the silence settle. Outside, the town continued, unfamiliar yet different, each step a reminder that sometimes it took the quietest voices to teach the loudest lessons. The diner's sign flickered in the twilight as the last of the evening's customers trickled out, leaving behind the quiet hum of a town settling in for the night. Inside, David Carter remained at his usual booth, a cup of black coffee gone cold but still untouched. The challenge coin sat on the table in front of him, its worn edges catching the glow of the overhead light. He traced its ridges with a calloused thumb, lost in thought. Outside, a small group of townspeople paused by the diner's window. They didn't knock or wave, they simply stood for a moment, watching him with a kind of reverence that was new to this placee. Silent acknowledgement that he was more than just a face among them. They didn't know the details of his missions or the battles he'd fought, but they knew enough now to understand the weight he carried. At the gun shop, the framed note beside the M1 Garand had become something of a local landmark. People stopped to read it, leaving small tokenza folded flag pin, a single white flower, a handwritten thank you on a torn receipt. Veterans from all branches came, some in groups, some alone, each paying quiet tribute to a man who had asked for nothing in return. Sarah Martinez passed by on her way home from the clinic, pausing by the window where Carter sat. She pressed her hand to the glass for a moment, no words, just a gesture of solidarity, and then moved on, leaving a small smile on Carter's face that lingered even after she was gone. In homes across town, parents told their children the story of the old soldier who'd been disrespected and the team that had come to stand beside him. Teachers wove his story into lessons on loyalty and sacrifice, reminding their students that true respect is earned not by medals but by silent deeds. David Carter never asked for recognition. He didn't write books or give speeches. His uniform hung in the back of a closet, the medals gathering dust. But he carried something no medal could measure: the trust of the men he'd led, the quiet strength of a life lived in service, and the respect of a community that had finally learned his name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Carter stood, sliding the challenge coin into his pocket. He walked out into the night, his steps sure and steady, the weight on his shoulders somehow lighter now. And in that small town, in the hush that followed his departure, something unspoken settled, a promise that his silence had never been in vain.